Okay, well, hello, swatters. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to take a look at fractions, percentages, and decimals. And we're going to take a look at what exactly are they. So, this will be a quick just introduction. I'm not going to try to spend too much time on it, but I think it's a good idea to kind of get a large overview as to why we've kind of grouped these three things together. Because you're probably thinking, okay, well, they're different things, but actually I'm going to show you that they're one and the same. Okay, so going over fractions, percentages, and decimals. Okay, so the main one is fractions, right? Fractions is like the go-to. Okay, so it's the main one. Okay, and fractions help us to deal with very complicated equations and so on and so forth. Okay, so when things get complicated, you want to use fractions. Now, percentages, they help us to deal with things with like in proportion to each other. So if we're going to like kind of compare two things and you want to say something is 50% larger than the other thing, so on and so forth. So you want to do like a 50% larger, you know? So over here is sort of like a comparison. So that's when we'd use percentages. And decimals, well, I'd refrain from decimals as much as possible, but this is when you want to do some very basic stuff. So this is like money, right? Now, money, you'd say £1.50. You wouldn't say something like £1.50, right? That doesn't make sense. Okay, so we'd say £1.50. Also, decimals are good for when we want to talk about stuff with like precision, and you'd see this in the topic called bounds, and they kind of tell us to what degree are you certain that a length is like 1 meter or so on and so forth. So an example would be sort of something like, I have a normal like 30 centimeter ruler. Okay, now if I try to measure the length of my hand, let's say, well, I'm not going to be able to say that my hand is, I don't know, I'm going to say that that's something around like 10 centimeters. Okay, so I can say that it's about 10 centimeters. I can probably say it's about like 10.2 centimeters because the grading on a ruler goes into like the millimeters, and so this 0.2 is referencing millimeters. But I cannot say that this is like 10.2034911 centimeters, because my 30 centimeter ruler does not go to that degree of accuracy, and so I can only say 10.2. So so decimals, they also help us to kind of think of a number a bit nicer than a fraction. So 1.5, the half, okay, it doesn't quite make sense, but if I say £1.50, then that's completely fine. But at the end of the day, all of these are just referencing numbers, okay? So these are all just equal to numbers, okay? And, numbers is the system we've come up with to kind of like relay certain information. So these are like amounts of stuff. And then I want to talk about specifically fractions, because like I said, fractions are your main go-to sort of number system, okay? So fractions, the main thing you need to really understand, right, is that, well, I'd say a good starting point would be, okay, let's think about a very easy kind of fraction system, okay? So we start from 0 and we go to 1, okay? Now, a lot of things have a unit from 0 to 1, okay? It's also kind of like saying something is like out of 10, but we like to use between 0 and 1 anyways. Okay, well, bang halfway, right? That is 1.5, okay? And the best way to do, oh, you could say 0.5, or you could also say 50%, okay? You could say either of these. So that's your percentage, that's your decimal, that's your fraction. Okay, if I go to this point here, it's 3/4, and if I go over here, it is 1/4. Now 1/4 is 0.25 or 25%, and 3/4 is 0.75, and that one is 75%. Okay, now let's just take a look very quickly actually. So I'm not going to actually go into fractions because this thing has just kind of come up. So I'm just going to go through this. Okay, if you notice something here that's kind of happening, well, they're involving somewhat of the same numbers, right? So one thing you need to know is percentage just means something over 100. And by over, I actually mean, divided. But I like to think of over because I'm thinking in terms of like fractions, okay? So if I take that 25%, right? Well, that is something over 100. Well, the something actually is 25 here, and then I put that over 100. Okay, now if I actually simplify this, and I'm not entirely sure if everybody will know how to do this, but the fact that there's two zeros, or there is actually an imaginary decimal point here, so the fact that there's two zeros, I kind of have to jump back 2 points, okay, and that gives me to 0.25. So there's more questions on the website about this, but for now, 25 over 100 is 0.25. I take 50%, 50%, so that would be 50 over 100. So remember, 50 is the something in this situation, and that would give me 0.5. And then the last one, I can do 75%, and that would give me 75 over 100, and that would give me 0.75. Okay, so we've just linked the fact that a percentage and a decimal is practically the same thing. Okay, so now let me just link for you how a decimal and a fraction are linked, basically. So if I take this number 0.25, well, we just said that 0.25, I can write it as 25 over 100, right? So it already is a fraction in this situation. You know, we went from a percentage to a fraction to a decimal. Now, if I take this fraction and I simplify it, so simplify it means I need to find something common that goes into 125. So, you know, I could go for something, and I think it's pretty blatant that 5 goes into both of these values. So I'm going to divide both of these by 5. Okay, and so 25 divided by 5 is 5, and so 100 divided by 5 is 20. Okay, all good. Again, I can divide by 5, so I'm going to do that again. And 5 divided by 5 is 1, 20 divided by 5 is 4, and so our 0.25 ended up being 1/4. And so we always want to write stuff in its simplified form. Okay, it's always easiest to think of it in its simplified form. However, 25 out of 100 is the same as 1/4. Because if you think about it, if I had 100 people in a room and 25 were wearing red shirts, that is the same proportion as if 4 people in a room and 1 person wearing a red shirt. Okay, so the same proportion of people are wearing a red shirt. That proportion would best be described as 25%. Okay, so if I'm thinking of it as a fraction, I'd say 1 in 4, or I'd say 25 in 100. Okay, so that's a way I can think of that value as a fraction. But the percentage really helps us, because I say 25%. So even if I said 200 to you, and I said 25% of 200 people are wearing red shirts. Okay, 25% of 200, well, that would be half and half of 200, and we're going to come on to that later on as well. So half of 200 is 100, another half is 50, and so 50 people would be wearing red shirts. So I've just tied in essentially that fractions, percentages, and decimals are all the same, and you can actually see it over here. Okay, and a good system to kind of like get a good grasp of this is the 0 to 1, and using these 3 intermediate values, and they will give you a good understanding as to how fractions, decimals, and percentages are all one and the same. And that's it for this lesson. I will continue to talk about fractions, percentages, and decimals. More specifically, I'm going to be using the content that is on the website, and I'd recommend you looking at some of the worksheets. I do have some collection called fractions, percentages, and decimals, and if you go on it, you can kind of see here that it goes from like grade 2, there's grade 5 there, there's grade 6 there. So it does. There's even a grade 7 in this fraction. So surds is not specifically fractions, percentages, and decimals, but a lot of fractions kind of comes up inside it. So that's why I included it here. And so here's some good practice to kind of get familiar with all of these things. And you can just take a look at like grade 2. Okay, so grade 2 fractions, decimals, and percentages. This one's a pretty good one. Write 0.32 as a percentage, so on and so forth. And so we're going to be working through some of these worksheets as well, whilst we're trying to learn it. Yeah. Okay. Cool.